Welcome back to the Metabolic Revolution podcast. I'm Dr. Steve Prosciutti, and today we're going after serotonin, the molecule you've been told is your brain's happiness chemical. I want to start somewhere that will seem like a detour for about 30 seconds. Picture a bear walking into a den in late October. Over the next few days, her body temperature falls by several degrees, her heart rate drops from 50 beats a minute to 9, her circulation slows, her digestion shuts down, and she becomes profoundly, unresponsively still. She is not sick. She is not sad. She is executing a program, an ancient and precise one, and the chemical that runs that program is serotonin. That's the fact I want you to sit with for the next 40 minutes, because the molecule orchestrating that shutdown is the exact same molecule your doctor is trying to raise in your brain. Quick reminder before we go any further, this podcast is educational content only, not medical advice. Nothing in this episode is a reason to change or stop a prescription. If you are taking an antidepressant, you need to hear the section near the end of this episode about tapering, and you need to work with the person who prescribed it. Please do not skip that part. This is episode 18, and at the end of last week's episode on seed oils, I told you we were going after something that would make some people genuinely angry. This is it. Here's what you're going to learn. You're going to learn what serotonin actually does to a mitochondrion, which is nothing like what you've been told. You're going to learn why hypothyroid people and depressed people look biochemically identical and why that is not a coincidence. You're going to learn what the research on tryptophan restriction and lifespan actually shows, which is genuinely one of the strangest findings in all of nutrition science. You're going to learn why a drug that removes serotonin from the brain works as an antidepressant, and why Prozac got approved for premenstrual dysphoric disorder for a reason that has nothing to do with serotonin at all. And then we're going to talk in specifics about what to do. If you have been told your problem is a chemical imbalance, and you have been treating it for years, and you are still cold and tired and flat, this episode is for you. Let's start with what everybody knows, because the mainstream story here is not stupid, it is elegant. The claim is that depression is caused by a deficiency of serotonin in the brain, that this is a chemical imbalance the way diabetes is an insulin problem, and that selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors correct it by keeping more serotonin in the synapse. It came with a beautiful piece of framing, too. Serotonin is the happiness molecule. It's in the yogurt commercials. It's the reason people are told to eat turkey and bananas and get more sunlight. And the reason this story took over the world in about 15 years is that it does three things at once, all of them appealing. It removes blame, because you didn't fail, your chemistry did. It offers a solution you can buy. And it makes psychiatry look like the rest of medicine, with a molecule and a deficiency and a drug. I understand completely why people believe it. I believed it. I was taught it. But here is the thing about that story. It was never demonstrated. In 2022, a research team led by Joanna Moncrieff published an umbrella review in Molecular Psychiatry, which is not a fringe journal, that went through every major line of evidence for the serotonin theory of depression, which means the metabolite studies, the receptor binding studies, the tryptophan depletion experiments, and the genetic association work. Across all of it, they found no consistent evidence that depression is caused by low serotonin or low serotonin activity. Ray Peat had been saying it for decades before that, and he said it more bluntly. He described the serotonin theory as a commercial and public relations construction rather than a scientific finding. When you look at the human neuroimaging and post-mortem data on melancholic depression, what you find is not a deficiency state. You find a hyperactive HPA axis, elevated cortisol, a shift toward inefficient glycolytic metabolism, and elevated, not reduced, serotonergic activity. Depression, energetically, is an expensive state. It is not the brain running low on a happiness chemical. It is the brain running an emergency program. So let me tell you about Rachel. 41 years old, high school guidance counselor, 2 kids, and she came to me having been on sertraline for 6 years. She was originally put on it after a genuinely hard year, a divorce and a parent's death in the same 18 months, which is exactly the situation where a prescription feels humane, and probably was. The problem is what happened after. The acute grief passed, and the flatness never did. She described it, and this is a phrase I hear constantly, as feeling like the volume knob on her whole life had been turned down. Not sad, just muted. She had gained 32 pounds over those 6 years without changing how she ate. She slept 9 hours and woke up unrefreshed. Her hands were cold enough that her students commented on it. Her libido was gone entirely, and she had stopped expecting it back. Her periods had gotten heavy and erratic. Her doctor had raised the dose twice and added bupropion, and when I met her, her waking temperature was 96.4 degrees and her resting pulse was 92. Every single one of those things is on the list of hypothyroid symptoms. Every single one. And her TSH was 2.8, which is inside the reference range, so nobody had looked further. Now let me build the mechanism, because once you see this, you cannot unsee it. In the bioenergetic model, the primary action of serotonin is the suppression of oxidative metabolism. That's it. That's the headline. Serotonin binds to and inhibits mitochondrial respiratory enzymes, which means it interferes with the cell's ability to take oxygen and glucose and turn them cleanly into ATP and carbon dioxide and water. When that pathway is blocked, the cell does not simply make less energy and carry on. It panics. It activates phosphofructokinase, the rate-limiting enzyme of glycolysis, and starts fermenting glucose into lactic acid instead, which is the emergency fuel pathway your cells use when oxygen is unavailable. In 1994, Karen Schwarzer and colleagues published exactly this in General Pharmacology. They injected serotonin into rats and measured what happened in the brain. Brain ATP fell. Inorganic phosphate rose. Lactate climbed sharply. Phosphofructokinase activity went up. In their own framing, injected serotonin produced the bioenergetic profile of cerebral ischemia, of a stroke. That is what this molecule does to brain energy metabolism, and it is the opposite of what the word happiness implies. It doesn't stop at respiration. Serotonin alters mitochondrial membrane permeability and impairs calcium transport. So calcium floods into the cell, mitochondria swell, and you get the setup for apoptosis and fibrosis. It's a potent vasoconstrictor. Alexandrin and colleagues showed in 2005 that administering serotonin dropped local cerebral blood flow by nearly 30%. So you have a molecule that simultaneously poisons the machinery that uses oxygen and restricts the delivery of oxygen to the tissue. And where does the body store it? In platelets, and in the enterochromaffin cells of the gut, which is where something like 95% of your body's serotonin lives. It gets released on injury, on clotting, on gut irritation. That is not the distribution pattern of a mood chemical. That is the distribution pattern of a damage signal, which is exactly what it is. It is a general alarm that says the environment has become hostile, so lower the metabolic rate, restrict the circulation, stop the digestion, and wait. I want to stay with the hibernation piece a moment longer because it reframes the entire symptom list. Torpor is not a malfunction. It is one of the most sophisticated things a mammal can do, and from the organism's point of view, it is the correct response to a specific message. The food is gone, the environment is hostile, and the smart move is to lower the burn rate and survive until conditions change. Serotonin is the molecule that carries that message and executes the program. It drops the temperature, it slows the heart, it shuts down digestion, because digestion is expensive and there's nothing to digest. It suppresses reproduction, because this is a terrible time to be pregnant. It flattens exploratory behavior and motivation, because moving around costs calories and exposes you to predators. Now read that list back and tell me it isn't a description of clinical depression. Cold, slow, no appetite or all appetite, no libido, no motivation to leave the house, sleep that doesn't restore. We have taken the mammalian conservation program, observed it in humans who are not hibernating, and named it a disease of the mind. And here's the part that should reorganize how you think about your own symptoms. The program is not being run at you by bad luck. It is being run because your physiology is receiving the message that conditions are hostile. That message gets sent by chronic undereating, by fasting, by overtraining, by a house you keep at 64 degrees to save money, by blood sugar that swings all day, and by a gut producing endotoxin around the clock. Your body is not confused. It is responding correctly to the information it has, and the intervention is to change the information. Which means I have to say something about cold plunges, and I know this will cost me some listeners. Deliberate cold exposure is the single most popular wellness practice in the country right now, and I want to be fair to it before I take it apart. It does something. You get out of that tub feeling electric, sharp, alive, and that feeling is real. The question is what produced it. Hans Selye, who invented the entire field of stress research, drew a distinction that almost nobody carries forward. Every stressor has stressor effects, which are the damage and the energy cost, and specific effects, which are the particular benefits unique to that stressor. For exercise, the specific effects are genuinely large: circulation, lymphatic flow, muscle, glucose disposal. Those outweigh the stress cost, which is why I want you moving. For cold exposure, the honest accounting is that the main specific effect is improved tolerance of cold. The euphoria is not a specific effect. It's a stress response, a surge of adrenaline, glucagon, and cortisol, the same pathway that gets activated by nicotine and by endotoxin. It feels like optimization for the same reason a triple espresso feels like optimization. And here's the part specific to today, which Jay Feldman has been good on. Cold is the exact environmental signal that the Hibernation program is listening for. You are voluntarily transmitting the message the whole rest of this episode is about undoing. Short term, you get the stress hormone high. Long term, in someone already cold at 96.8 degrees in the morning, you are reinforcing the suppression. Warmth is not softness. Warmth is the condition under which a mammal permits itself a high metabolic rate. Which brings us to the bear and to thyroid. Serotonin and thyroid hormone are functional antagonists. They oppose each other directly. Active thyroid hormone, T3, drives oxidative metabolism, and one of the products of oxidative metabolism is carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide physically suppresses the release of serotonin. That is a clean feedback loop. High metabolism means high CO2 means suppressed serotonin. Now run it backward. In 1975, Schwark and Kesey induced hypothyroidism in animals with propylthiouracil and measured brain serotonin, and they found it increased markedly across every brain region they looked at. So low thyroid raises serotonin, and serotonin suppresses respiration, which further lowers effective thyroid function. It is a loop that tightens on itself. And this is why hypothyroidism and depression are not two conditions that happen to co-occur. Symptomatically, they are close to indistinguishable because they are two descriptions of one state: cold, slow, flat, unmotivated, sleeping badly, gaining weight, digesting poorly. We spent a whole episode on this in episode 7, on the idea that your thyroid isn't broken, your metabolism is. Serotonin is a large part of the reason a person can have a normal TSH and be living in a fully hypothyroid body. The last piece of the mechanism is where it gets personal, because it's about what you eat. Serotonin is made from tryptophan, an amino acid you get from food, and specifically from muscle meat and egg white. But tryptophan has to cross into the brain, and here's the detail that ties this episode to the last one. Free polyunsaturated fatty acids in the bloodstream displace tryptophan from albumin and accelerate its uptake into the brain. The seed oils we spent last week on are the delivery mechanism for the serotonin we're talking about this week. That's the handoff. And there's a second route. Under stress, under fasting, under any condition that depletes liver glycogen, cortisol rises and breaks down your own muscle tissue for glucose. And that catabolism dumps a flood of tryptophan into your blood. So the two fastest ways to raise brain serotonin are to eat a lot of polyunsaturated fat and to not eat enough food, which is more or less the standard modern approach to feeling bad about yourself. So back to Rachel. The first thing I want to say is what we did not do, which is touch her prescription. I don't prescribe her psychiatric medication, I didn't manage her taper, and I told her from the first visit that any change to sertraline was a conversation between her and her prescriber, on their timeline, slowly. What we did instead was fix the metabolic floor underneath the drug. We got her eating. Her intake was around 1,500 calories, and we brought it to roughly 2,200, with breakfast inside 40 minutes of waking, because a glycogen-depleted liver in the morning is a cortisol generator. We got carbohydrate to about 200 grams a day from orange juice, ripe fruit, honey, white rice, and potatoes, spread across 4 eating occasions instead of 2. We pulled the seed oils, which for her meant the canola she cooked in, the almonds she snacked on, and the salad dressing she used every single day at lunch. Butter and coconut oil went back in. We added 20 grams of gelatin daily alongside her meat meals and another 5 grams in warm milk before bed. Daily raw carrot salad, 1 medium carrot shredded lengthwise with a teaspoon of coconut oil, a teaspoon of vinegar, and salt, eaten away from meals. She salted her food generously. 15 minutes of morning sun on the back porch before the school run. Week 2, she'd gained 5 pounds and called me upset. That is glycogen and water refilling an empty liver, and it is the single most common point at which people quit. So I want to name it plainly. The scale goes up before it goes down, and it means the plan is working. Week 4, waking temperature 97.0, and she reported the first real change, which was that she was falling asleep in under 20 minutes instead of lying awake for an hour. Week 7 is where it opened up. Temperature 97.4, pulse down to 84, and her hands were warm for the first time in years. She told me she'd laughed at something on the radio and then pulled the car over because she had not laughed spontaneously in a very long time, and it startled her. Month 4, waking temperature 97.9, pulse 78, 21 pounds down from her starting weight without her counting anything. At that point, and only at that point, her psychiatrist agreed she was stable enough to begin a slow reduction, which took another 8 months and which they ran, not me. Where she landed is a woman who is off the medication at 98.1 degrees with a regular cycle who describes the volume knob as back up. And I want to be careful about the claim here. I am not telling you sertraline caused her metabolic problem. I am telling you the metabolic problem was never addressed, and that a body running at 96.4 degrees will produce the exact symptom list that gets labeled treatment-resistant depression. Now let's go deeper, because there are 2 more mechanisms feeding this, and they connect directly to episodes we've already done. The first is estrogen. Estrogen and serotonin operate in a mutually reinforcing loop. Estrogen inhibits monoamine oxidase A, which is the enzyme that degrades serotonin. So when estrogen is high, serotonin clears slowly and accumulates. Estrogen also activates mast cells to release serotonin and histamine directly into tissue. Meanwhile, progesterone does the opposite, inhibiting serotonergic firing and acting as a general anti-stress, pro-metabolic hormone. Remember episode 15, when we talked about estrogen not being low but trapped in the tissue? This is the other half of that conversation, and it explains something clinicians see constantly and rarely explain. Why premenstrual symptoms, perimenopausal mood collapse, and postpartum depression all cluster at exactly the moments when progesterone falls and estrogen is unopposed. It is not a mysterious sensitivity to hormones. It is a serotonin excess produced by a hormonal environment that has stopped clearing it. The second is the gut, and this is where it comes all the way around to episode 9. Intestinal endotoxin, the lipopolysaccharide released by gram-negative bacteria when you feed them slowly digesting fermentable material, directly triggers the secretion of serotonin. It also triggers histamine, estrogen, and cortisol, and it biochemically paralyzes cytochrome C oxidase, complex 4 of the electron transport chain, which is the same target serotonin itself hits. So a person with poor digestion and a fermenting gut is producing an endogenous serotonin drip and simultaneously poisoning their respiratory chain from a second direction. That is why the carrot salad is not a cute folk remedy. Raw carrot fiber is essentially non-fermentable. It carries natural antimicrobial compounds, and it physically binds endotoxin and excess estrogen and carries them out. It is a mechanical intervention against the gut serotonin axis, and it costs about 40 cents. Let me give you a second case because I don't want you to think this is only a psychiatry story. Tom, 47, commercial electrician, never took an antidepressant in his life and would have told you he wasn't depressed, and he was right. What he had was 6 years of what 2 gastroenterologists had called irritable bowel syndrome. Loose stools most mornings, bloating by mid-afternoon that he described as looking 6 months pregnant by dinner, and a specific complaint I hear all the time and take very seriously, which is that he woke at 3 a.m. almost every night, wide awake, heart going, and could not get back down. He'd been through the low FODMAP protocol, he'd done 2 rounds of rifaximin, he was eating what he thought was impeccably: oatmeal, chicken breast, big salads, almonds, a protein shake, and he'd added psyllium and a probiotic. Waking temperature 96.8, resting pulse 88, and his hands were so cold he kept a pair of gloves in the truck in July. Now look at that diet through the lens of this episode. Oatmeal, raw salad greens, almonds, and psyllium are 4 separate slow-fermenting substrates feeding the endotoxin production that triggers serotonin release. Chicken breast and whey are close to pure tryptophan and cysteine with no glycine to balance them. And the 3 a.m. waking is a textbook cortisol spike from a liver that ran out of glycogen in the night. He was not eating badly by any conventional standard. He was eating a serotonin protocol. What we did with Tom was almost boring. Oatmeal out, replaced with well-cooked white rice and potato and fruit. Raw salad out, cooked and peeled vegetables in, plus the daily carrot. Almonds and psyllium gone. Chicken breast down to a few meals a week and always with 20 grams of gelatin alongside, with the rest of his protein coming from eggs, shellfish, and about a quart of milk a day, which he resisted for 2 weeks and then stopped arguing about. Carbohydrate up to roughly 250 grams because he's a big man doing physical work. Salt on everything. And a small snack before bed, which sounds like the opposite of every piece of sleep advice on the internet, but which exists specifically to keep his liver glycogen from bottoming out at 2 a.m. Week 1. The 3 a.m. waking stopped. Week 1. That is how fast the glycogen mechanism is when it's the thing that's wrong. By week 5, the bloating was gone, and his stools had normalized for the first time since 2020. Week 8. Waking temperature 97.5, pulse 80. Month 5. Temperature 98.0, pulse 76, hands warm, gloves out of the truck. He never took a drug and he never had a mood disorder, and he was living in the same serotonin-dominant physiology Rachel was. That's the point. The molecule doesn't know whether you got a psychiatric diagnosis or a gastroenterology one. Here's where it gets genuinely insidious, though, and this is the part I want you to take with you. If the serotonin theory were true, then raising serotonin should reliably lift mood, and lowering it should reliably crush it. Neither is what happens. Inject serotonin and you get sedation, gastrointestinal distress, and behavioral despair. In animal models, high serotonin is the biological driver of learned helplessness, which is the closest thing experimental psychology has to a model of depression. Meanwhile, compounds that antagonize serotonin act as antidepressants. and the cleanest demonstration of this is a drug called Tianeptine, which is a selective serotonin reuptake enhancer. It is the mechanical opposite of an SSRI. It sweeps serotonin out of the synapse faster, and it works as an antidepressant. In 1997, McEwen and colleagues published work in European Neuropsychopharmacology on chronically stressed animals, where stress causes measurable atrophy of the dendrites in the hippocampus, the memory structure. Tianeptine prevented that atrophy completely. Fluoxetine, Prozac, did not. A drug that removes serotonin protected the brain, and the drug that keeps serotonin around did nothing. So then, why do SSRIs help some people? Because they demonstrably do help some people, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The bioenergetic answer is uncomfortable. Acutely, SSRIs inhibit oxidative phosphorylation in the brain and liver and reduce brain glucose consumption, which is not a therapeutic effect, it is a metabolic insult. And clinically, the benefit does not appear for weeks. Why the delay? Because what the brain does with a sustained serotonin surge is treat it as a threat and compensate, downregulating serotonin synthesis and desensitizing serotonin receptors. The modest benefit, when it comes, arrives from the compensatory reduction in serotonergic tone, not from the increase. The brain is not being corrected by the drug. The brain is defending itself against the drug, and the defense is what helps. And then there is the piece that I think should be much more famous than it is. Fluoxetine increases brain allopregnanolone, which is a neurosteroid made from progesterone, and which is calming, anticonvulsant, and genuinely pro-metabolic. That effect has nothing to do with serotonin. Eli Lilly used it to get fluoxetine rebranded as Sarafem and approved for premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So a drug was marketed to women for a hormonal condition on the strength of a progesterone-like mechanism while being explained to those women as a serotonin correction. Progesterone itself, incidentally, costs almost nothing. I want to spend a minute on how the chemical imbalance story got into your head, because it did not arrive through the scientific literature. It arrived through television. Direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising was effectively deregulated in the United States in 1997, and within about 3 years, the serotonin deficiency explanation was in every living room in the country. If you are old enough, you remember the Zoloft commercials with the little sad bouncing egg and the line that depression may be related to an imbalance of natural chemicals between nerve cells in the brain. Notice the construction of that sentence. It says, may be related to. It is not a claim, it is a suggestion wearing the costume of a claim, and it was written that way by people who knew exactly what the evidence did and did not support. In 2005, Jeffrey Lacasse and Jonathan Leo published a paper in PLOS Medicine titled, and I love this title, Serotonin and Depression, a disconnect between the advertisements and the scientific literature. They laid the marketing claims next to the actual research and showed the gap directly. That was 21 years ago. The advertising did not change. And the reason I bring this up is not to make you cynical for the sake of it. It's that the phrase chemical imbalance is now something patients say to their doctors, having learned it from a commercial, and doctors then confirm it, having heard it from patients and from representatives, and the loop closes with nobody in the room having read the primary literature. That is how a marketing slogan becomes a diagnosis. So what do you actually do? Start with what to stop. Stop the seed oils, all of them, because they are the transport mechanism for tryptophan into your brain, and they block thyroid at 4 separate points, which is the entire subject of last week's episode. Stop eating isolated muscle meat and egg white without a buffer, because chicken breast and lean steak are loaded with tryptophan and cysteine, both of which suppress thyroid function and feed the exact pathway we are trying to quiet. Stop fasting. Not reduce it, stop it. Fasting empties liver glycogen, which forces cortisol to break down your own muscle, which floods your blood with tryptophan, and a glycogen-depleted liver also loses the ability to convert T4 into active T3. Fasting is, mechanistically, a serotonin-generating protocol. And ease off the slowly fermenting foods that feed endotoxin production, which means whole grains, legumes, raw cruciferous vegetables, and undercooked starch. Then here's what to add. Gelatin or collagen, 20 to 30 grams a day, taken alongside your meat meals, because gelatin contains essentially no tryptophan and no cysteine, and it rebalances the amino acid profile of a muscle meat meal. Glycine is the active piece, and it directly opposes serotonin synthesis. 5 to 10 grams in something warm before bed if you sleep badly. The daily raw carrot, 1 medium, shredded lengthwise, with a teaspoon of coconut oil, a teaspoon of vinegar, and salt, on an empty stomach and away from meals. Carbohydrate at 175 to 200 grams a day minimum from ripe fruit, orange juice, honey, and well-cooked root vegetables, spread across 3 or 4 meals, because a full liver is what shuts off the adrenaline and cortisol that start this whole cascade. Saturated fat at 20 to 30% of calories from butter, ghee, tallow, and coconut oil, which, unlike unsaturated fats, do not stimulate serotonin release. Generous salt with every meal, which lowers aldosterone and adrenaline and supports CO2 retention. Aspirin, 100 to 325 milligrams with food, which behaves in the mitochondria a lot like T3 does and blocks serotonin-driven platelet aggregation, and which you clear with your doctor if you are on a blood thinner or have any bleeding history. 15 to 30 minutes of morning sunlight within half an hour of waking, and for women, bioidentical progesterone, 10 to 50 milligrams, taken during the luteal phase, days 14 through 28, which is a conversation to have with a clinician who understands it. 2 honest gaps I want to flag rather than fake. Cyproheptadine is a direct serotonin antagonist with a long clinical history, and it is discussed at length in the bioenergetic literature, but I am not going to give you a dose over a podcast microphone because it is prescription only and sedating, and dosing it belongs in a clinical relationship. And on SSRI tapering, I want to be as clear as I know how to be. Do not stop an antidepressant abruptly, and do not taper one without the prescriber who wrote it. Discontinuation from these drugs can be genuinely severe. The receptor changes we talked about are real, and they take months to unwind, and the withdrawal state itself generates exactly the autonomic stress we are trying to eliminate. The right order of operations is the one Rachel used. Build the metabolic floor first, over months, while remaining fully medicated, and let the taper be a conversation you have from a position of strength. Here's how you know it's working, and this is the part I care about most, because it means you don't have to take my word for any of this. Every morning, before your feet touch the floor, take your temperature and your pulse. That's it. Those 2 numbers are a live readout of your metabolic rate, and unlike TSH, they tell you what your cells are doing, rather than what your pituitary is asking for. Waking temperature below 97.3 means metabolic suppression. You want it above 97.8 and trending toward 98.6. Resting pulse should sit between 75 and 85. And if your pulse is high while your temperature is low, that is not a healthy metabolism. That is adrenaline compensating for a cold body, and it will come down as the temperature comes up. Expect sleep to change first, often within 2 weeks. Expect temperature to move in 3 to 6 weeks. Expect the emotional flatness to lift somewhere between 6 weeks and 4 months, which is slower than a drug and more durable. And if you want the whole framework built out with the food lists and the tracking, that's what the bioenergetic reset is, at $133 a month, and it exists specifically because this particular protocol is hard to run alone while you're still on medication. If you want the simpler starting point, Energy Reset Essentials is $39. And if you've already been doing most of this, if you're eating enough and you're off the seed oils and your temperature still won't come up past 97.2, that's usually a thyroid or a gut problem underneath, and that's exactly what a free discovery call is for. Let me take the questions I get most. People ask what the signs of high serotonin actually are, and the honest answer is that they are the signs you were told meant low serotonin: fatigue, low mood, poor sleep despite spending long hours in bed, cold hands and feet, low body temperature, poor digestion or IBS, low libido, and a general flatness. Add nausea, gut cramping, and vasoconstriction symptoms like cold extremities and headaches, and you have the picture. The next question is always how to raise serotonin naturally, and my answer is that you should not want to. What people are really asking for is warmth, energy, and the ability to feel things again, and every intervention that reliably delivers those, which is adequate food, sufficient carbohydrate, warmth, sunlight, and thyroid function, works by improving oxidative metabolism, not by raising serotonin. The third question is whether low serotonin exists at all, and yes, states of very low serotonergic tone exist, but they are not the common problem in the population sitting in my office, which is chronically cold, chronically stressed, chronically underfed people. People ask me what deficiency is really behind all this, expecting me to name a single nutrient, and the honest answer is that the deficiency is energy, not a molecule. But if you want the specific cofactors, the ones that matter most here are the ones that let you make and use thyroid hormone and clear serotonin. Adequate carbohydrate to keep the liver converting T4 to T3, selenium and iodine in food amounts rather than megadoses, riboflavin and niacinamide for the respiratory chain, magnesium and copper, which you need for the enzymes that degrade monoamines, and glycine, which is technically not a deficiency because your body makes some, but which almost nobody eats enough of because we stopped eating skin, bone broth, and connective tissue about 3 generations ago. A diet of muscle meat with no gelatin is a diet designed to raise serotonin. Then there's the question I get from people who tried this once and felt worse, and I want to answer it carefully because it's the reason most people quit. If you add a lot of carbohydrate to a body that has been running on stress hormones for years, you can feel shaky, anxious, or sleepy for the first week or two, while the adrenaline that was propping you up gets withdrawn. That is not the food being wrong. That is the scaffolding coming down. The fix is not to retreat to low carb, it's to eat more frequently and smaller. Always pair the carbohydrate with protein and salt and a little saturated fat, and never eat fruit alone on an empty stomach in that first stretch. Give it 2 weeks. And the other version of this question is from people who added gelatin and got constipated, which happens. And the answer there is usually that they added the gelatin without adding the fluid, the salt, or the carbohydrate to go with it. The last one people ask is how they'll know whether they're the thyroid case or the gut case or the estrogen case. And my answer is that the question is a little bit of a trap, because in almost everyone, it's all three feeding each other. But the tell is timing. If your worst symptom is waking at 3 in the morning, look at liver glycogen and eat before bed. If it's bloating and loose stools with cold hands, look at the gut and start with the carrot and cooked vegetables. If it's cyclical, if it reliably worsens in the second half of your cycle or arrived at perimenopause, look at progesterone. And if it's flat, cold, and constant with a normal TSH, look at thyroid, regardless of what the lab said. The protocol is largely the same in every case, which is convenient because it means you can start before you have the answer. I get asked about serotonin syndrome, which is real and is a medical emergency, and I would point out the obvious thing that almost nobody says out loud, which is that the acute toxic syndrome caused by too much serotonin looks like agitation, tremor, sweating, hyperthermia, diarrhea, and confusion. Nobody has ever described an acute toxic syndrome of too little. That asymmetry should tell you which direction the danger runs. And then the strangest question, which is what tryptophan does long term. And this is the finding I'd point to if I could only keep one. Segal and Timoras, publishing through the 1970s and 80s in Mechanisms of Aging and Development, restricted dietary tryptophan in rats and found that it delayed aging, preserved metabolic rate and body temperature into old age, and extended lifespan. The number that sticks with me is reproductive. Control rats stopped delivering litters around 17 months, and tryptophan-restricted rats were still successfully delivering at 36 months. Selye showed back in 1965 that injecting serotonin causes muscular dystrophy in animals, and Osteen showed in 1967 that a serotonin antagonist extended the lifespan of mice with hereditary muscular dystrophy. And one more, because it's the most immediately useful. Idzikowski and colleagues in 1986 gave human volunteers ritanserin, a serotonin 2 antagonist, and doubled the duration of deep, slow-wave sleep. Blocking serotonin improves sleep. Think about what that means for the serotonin-boosting sleep advice you have been given for 20 years. So here's what this all comes down to. Serotonin is not a happiness molecule. It is a shutdown signal, a hibernation program, a damage and defense chemical that lowers your temperature, restricts your circulation, poisons your mitochondrial respiration, and produces the exact state we have learned to call depression. It rises when your thyroid is low, when your gut is inflamed, when your estrogen is unopposed, when you eat seed oils, and when you don't eat enough. And that means the flatness, the cold hands, the weight that won't move, and the sleep that doesn't restore are not a personal or moral failure, and not a defect in your character. They are a metabolic state, and metabolic states are changeable. So here's my challenge for this week, and it is deliberately small. Tomorrow morning, before you get out of bed, take your temperature and your pulse and write both down. Then do it every morning for 6 weeks. If that waking number is under 97.3, you now know something about yourself that 6 years of visits might not have surfaced, and you have a target that has nothing to do with how hard you are trying to feel better. Add gelatin and a carrot and a real breakfast, and watch the number move. Next week, we're staying in the brain, but coming at it from the opposite direction. Because if serotonin is the shutdown signal, carbon dioxide is the signal that you're safe. We're doing a full episode on CO2, why the thing you were taught is a waste gas is one of the most protective molecules in your body, why breathing more is not the same as oxygenating better, and what the Bohr effect actually means for your hands being cold. If this episode reframes serotonin for you, that one is going to do the same thing to breathing. This is educational content only. Work with a healthcare provider who understands metabolic health. And if you take a psychiatric medication, work with the person who prescribed it before you change anything at all. You're not broken, and you didn't fail at being happy. Your metabolism went into hibernation, and nobody told you that was what it was. You came to the right place. Let's talk.